it has happened to me. There's no turning back. There's nothing that would have changed in any circumstances because I have the rational, logical thinking method. But in some ways, it has shifted who I am to be this person that I really like being right now. Like, I love the person that I've become. The decisions that I've made in the last 2 years have been life-changing for me.
Hey guys, welcome to Keep On Pushing Stories. This is where we take a deep dive into the real life story and the mindsets of people who have pushed past their limitations, overcome obstacles, and just achieved in a major way. And we think that all of us have a story and all of us can relate to a story. So we want to bring these stories to you to inspire you. And today I have the real honor of welcoming my good friend Gayatree Dipchan to the show. Gaia, welcome to
Gaia,
Keep On Pushing Story.
thank you. I'm really honored to be here, Devon. We have been building this relationship for a few months now, have
Yeah.
had some really good conversations. I'm really excited to be here with you.
Well, I'm looking forward to another amazing conversation. So tell us, Gaia. Well, I know, but why don't you tell our audience what it is that you do? How do you serve? How do you bring value to the lives of others?
So I'm a psychologist. I am a behavior psychologist. But it took years to align to becoming a behavior psychologist. What I actually have done for more than 20 years is that I have worked with survivors of domestic violence, sexual violence. For 10 years, I worked in the Caribbean, 10 to 15 years, I would say. I worked in the Caribbean with women, children, and men who have been through sexual assaults, rapes, gang violence. Yeah, so that's what I have been doing for such a long time. From that, I have kind of like continued to pivot into spaces of using the work and the knowledge that I've gained in understanding humans and now work in corporate cultures, in communities, global communities. So I've worked in the UK, I'm working in the Caribbean still. It's still the space that I love working in. I know I live in Norway. So let's see what Norway brings for me.
Indeed. So when you're working in the, let's say, corporate spaces, and I know you also work with NGOs, give us an insight on what it is that you're doing exactly for them.
In corporate spaces, what it is working with executives. I do behavior coaching. So as a therapist, you have a lot of psychological insights on how people and why people do the things that they do. And sometimes when you look at leadership culture, you're seeing a person as someone who's already set and sitting on a seat. So they're already the CEO, they're already all these things. But behind that, there's a person who have grown to that space, who have had a ton of experiences, personal and professional. And a lot of times when we coach people, we forget that they have insights and they have strengths that they have developed over years. And those strengths don't come from just walking into spaces. We develop strengths from understanding our challenges and from identifying strengths in our challenges. And sometimes the challenges aren't things that we talk about still. It's things that we pivot from. And it's almost like we forget the steps it took to get to that space. So when I'm working with leaders, I think for me, it's about understanding the person and not the position. It's about an entire system, an environment that shapes that individual. And how do they transform and create transformations in the spaces that they are currently in?
Mm. So, Gaia, if someone wanted to reach out to you, maybe they could use your help to go through this transformation. How would
No,
they?
certainly.
Yeah, how would they
Certainly.
find?
I'm on LinkedIn. I live in Europe, so everybody asks you anytime. They don't want a CV anymore. They want a bio, which is one page, they want your LinkedIn profile, and they want your website. So I've got the LinkedIn profile. You can find me by my full name, Gayatree Dipchan. And I've also got a website, www.gayatreedipchan.com.
All right, GayatreeDipchan.com. Awesome. So now we know how to find you. We know what it is that you do. The thing that we're really curious to know, though, is your keep on pushing story. We'd love to hear of a time, Gaia, when you had to overcome a significant hurdle or push out of your comfort zone, whatever it is, and you had to overcome in order to achieve, in order to get to the next level, that transformation that you speak of. So please do tell us your keep on pushing story.
So I'm going to tell you, so when I trained in the UK, I trained in the UK as a psychologist. And when I trained, I thought, oh, I'm going to specialize in corporate psychology and organizational psychology. I decided, okay, I'll start working in HR. I wouldn't lie. HR, God bless those humans who choose to work in human resource management. I struggled. I ended up wanting to work in a non-governmental sector. And what I did is I took my degree and I started to work in Victim Support London, where I was interacting with humans who had had extremely difficult experiences when it came to violence. And from that, I went into deciding that psychology and specializing in trauma studies and gender-based violence was where I wanted to go. So I want to say very clearly, my father was extremely disappointed from the fact that I went from human resource management to trauma-informed studies. While I was there, I really met a lot of people that influenced the way I thought about how I did things. I got back to Trinidad, so from the UK, living for 8 years, from 20 to 28 years old. I went back to the Caribbean. And when I went back, I I was assaulted. And it happened in such a way that I was already working in a space where I was comfortable and happy and doing the stuff that I like. So I was already working in domestic violence. I was already working with gangs in the Caribbean as well, in Trinidad specifically. And then someone literally took every single thing that I learned in the 8 years of doing trauma studies and working with these people and said to me, you know something, you know all that, but the reality is you've not experienced it. So I was assaulted sexually and physically. Um, and funny enough, the anniversary of that, 16 years anniversary of that is in 10 days. So it's really helpful to speak about it now, I guess. So yes, on the 24th of November, I was sexually assaulted and beaten to a point where I was left for dead. And to come out of that was the hardest thing because what I thought I knew in that 8 years of training, I could not apply it into my own life. There was no way I could fathom a human being doing that to someone else. And also, I couldn't understand how all those theories that you learn when you're studying, how could I apply it to my own life? And I always believe God has a plan for everything. Huh? Nothing happens without reason and without opportunity at the end of it. And when that happened, I couldn't walk for a long time. I had broken my torso. I had ribs that were fractured and broken. I had a traumatic brain injury. I had a big TBI problem where I lost some of my long-term memory. Had some problems with short-term memory over a period of time. I had 9 fractures around my eyes. So my eyeball literally started to drop. And I had like 2 different level eyes. I had a bruised throat that took a long time before I could actually speak again because I was held up being choked at that point in time as well. So let's just say I was a very broken person. Um, and physically broken. We're not talking about the mental stuff yet. This is just like physical broken. I was told after that that I should not go back into working with the populations that I was accustomed working with. And I remember starting back working after a period of time because I had to go through counseling. I had to go through being supervised again because now I am approaching it very differently. Remember, I'm dealing with people, I'm working with people through their own trauma. So now I have to be re-supervised so that I can better be informed of how I am dealing with when I hear similar stories. So I had to go through this process. And I found that I felt as though I wasn't contributing when I wasn't working with women, children, and men who have had traumatic experiences of sexual violence. I actually felt as though I wasn't giving what I knew. I felt I was just earning money and not really impacting their lives. I was doing the psychology, I was doing the emotional intelligence work. I was doing all those things, yet didn't feel fulfilled. And then that again, the circle, you have to choose your networks, you have to choose your circles very, very wisely. And there was a moment when someone said to me, do you want to start back working? And I remember pushing so much that I want to start back working with some women and children. I wanted to get back in that space. And everybody was like, no, you can't do that because you've had this, this, this. And I'm thinking to myself, I have been through it. So I know how hard it is to to sit and tell someone I have been raped. I know how hard it is. I also know how hard it is to feel judged in the society I was in at that moment. And I know you and I have spoken about how transgenerational normative expectations and behaviors affect our perceptions when we live in other countries. But when you're there and people hear that you're raped, oh my word, the things that are said about you, it's almost like you put yourself in a position and you just said, come do whatever you want to me. That's the stories you can hear. So I went through all those lovely, phenomenal stories. Storytelling is a big thing, but there's also a storytelling that you learn for yourself. There's a narrative that you learn to tell yourself, and that is what gets you through. And that stems from how you were brought up. That stems from the people around you. I am very grateful for my father, my mother, my brother, my sister. Because even though it took a long time for me to share, and when I say a long time, we're talking recent years, the experience of the sexual violence took a very, very long time to be so open about it. They never not supported me. They were so present. And right now I'm going through a divorce, and my ex-husband at that point was very supportive of as well. I have to give him a lot of credit for that. Um, but the experience of knowing that I have been through this felt as though the higher power cannot have had me go through something like that and not be able to help others through it. Because I know things that somebody else don't know. I know what it is to not want to talk to someone. I know what it is for people to tell you what it is you should be doing to heal. And you're like, you for real? You've been through this to tell me that? You know?
What was the toughest part of your own, um, I guess, counseling as you're going through counseling, and someone and others were professional now trying to help you to go through it, especially as a behavioral psychologist who was helping others? What was the most difficult part of the journey for you personally?
Finding the right therapist. Because before I found my beautiful, wonderful Mrs. Maureen Murray, before I found her, I went through 4 different psychologists. And each one of them became people for me who just wanted to tell me the steps to get through this. For me, they didn't want to hear, and maybe they did, but the interpretation that came across was you want to hear my story, right? But you also want to take the information and stack it into the how to do it based on a theory.
Right.
So I kept seeing that with the other psychologists because I know the information, I know the theory, right? And I can see, okay, if I speak about the guy walking in and how I felt about having an interaction, conversation with him, because that happened, I could see someone, I saw the different psychologists telling me, or even like processing, okay, that means that. There wasn't, for me, the active listening and the compassion that came with active listening. It wasn't someone who was saying, okay, I am actually like putting their whole body forward and saying to me, I am listening to you. What you say is valuable to your growth. I didn't get that from four different psychologists.
Yeah. How did that compare to how you were practicing at the time before the assault?
It felt mechanical. Like, you know, when I was in the UK, it was very different from being in the Caribbean. When I was in UK and I was doing my training, I went into people's homes. I went into spaces that I was seeing what was happening. So you could see the dynamics of what domestic violence looks like in the space that is happening.
Mhm.
You are trained in such a way with some of these NGOs in the UK. And this is my training. We're talking about when I was 25. I'm 44 now, so nearly 20 years ago. Where if you're volunteering and learning the art of counseling and understanding the behaviors that comes from domestic violence or sexual violence or child abuse, you're actually exposed to all the factors of it. So I went back to Trinidad with that knowledge base. And for me, I engaged in that way at that point in time. Then this assault happened. Then I saw what I was potentially being to someone else. And I was like, this is all wrong for me. This is all wrong.
Yeah.
And then when I started counseling with Mrs. Murray, and I will say her name if you don't mind. Um, when I started counseling with her, she also trained in the UK. And I'm not saying all UK counselors are like this or psychologists are like this, right? But the way in which she trained was also similar to the way I trained, in that you were in real life scenarios, constantly being engaged like that. So one of the things that she said to me, she said, I want you to remember, don't compare your experiences and how you have been trained to others. You have been trained, this happened to you. Now, what can you do with this to inform what you know from being trained that way to pivot you to where you want to be? This is the wisdom of Mrs. Murray.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's actually quite wise, quite instructive. So you go through this assault. You are now being counseled by Mrs. Murray. You eventually work your way back to really your purpose. This thing has happened to you, and I think on a couple of different levels. If you talk about being resilient, how do you reframe the experience to make it empower you as opposed to disempower you? But how also do you now, given your knowledge and experience, contribute to society? Talk to me about that path forward as transition. You went from this experience to now how you're going to use this experience and knowledge to help people get through their own trauma.
The thing is, you use the word resilience there, and for many years, you don't think you're resilient, you know. You're actually kind of surviving because for many years, I felt as though I was just surviving. It wasn't at no point for a number of years, like let's just say it happened 10 years after, I didn't feel as though I was making a decision that I am resilient and I'm thriving. It took many years of building back my confidence and then working, going back in the spaces where I felt as though I was giving back. So I started to work at the Rape Crisis Society of Trinidad and Tobago. And I think that was the best job I have ever had. Um, I don't think like as I know I was interviewed, but I felt as though when I walked in, I had a conversation. I didn't feel like I had an interview. I felt as though I had a conversation with a board of directors, people who were passionate about what they did. It represented something in terms of what they were going to do. And then I started to work with these. I had like 8 clients a day. So every day, 8 clients a day. So say 5 days a week, I'm seeing 8 clients a day. And that's when I started to feel as though finally what I know for myself, my experiences, everything, I'm actually able to see more. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. When you train in behavior psychology, you're understanding individual cues, you're understanding how facial expressions work, you're understanding body language, you're understanding why people move the way they move, why they sit in the spaces that they sit. You're understanding why you put your hands like that, how often you're watching little cues constantly, and it informs what you do, right? In this space, now I am with primarily men, women, and children who have had to protect all these cues. They have had to protect it because of survival, right? And I know what that feels like to have to protect your cues because you are not only surviving, you are trying to stay alive.
Mm-hmm.
That's very, very different.
Yeah.
And I think, as I said, this was like the best time of my life because it was informing. It was actually what Mrs. Murray said. Now I am seeing what I know differently. I
So that
saw it
allowed you
once.
to be a lot more empathetic, and you weren't just kind of like your first 4 therapists robot going through the process.
Sorry, say that again.
So that allowed you to be a lot more empathetic with your clients and not like your first 4 therapists, like a robot just going through the
That's
process
right.
and clicking boxes.
That's right. And I think it goes beyond empathy as well. It's almost like it's almost like you're sitting in a space where you're not thinking about what the client needs to do. You're no longer there. You're so actively engaged in listening to what that person's story is that every single behavior informs what happens next. Every single behavior, from where they sit in the room to where how they position themselves when they're engaging with you.
Mm-hmm.
So all those things started to make sense to me in a very different way because I did it.
Yeah. You said something really, I think, important about resilience, that for 10 years you felt like you were surviving, not being resilient. Um, and it just kind of occurred to me because a lot of times people, when they think of resilience, this bouncing back from a setback, it almost have the ring of not necessarily an overnight, but an immediacy that this setback happened and you bounce back. And it seems to me like it's probably more like you build back over time to not so much where you were before, but I like to say you bounce forward. So you um, had the setback and now you've built yourself to become someone who is far more in tune with the challenges that your clients are facing.
That's how I felt. And I didn't see it until after I left Rape Crisis and chose to do things, chose to have my own practice and chose very clearly, like a lot of the work that I do now with private clients is I want to work in this area. It's clients that, and they're all referred. I mean, I've gotten to a space where I'm so happy that people can say, I know Gayatree. she can help you, you know. But as you rightly said, my experience wasn't that something big happened and then all of a sudden there was resilience. My God, I lost all my confidence, my self-worth in who I was. I felt as though someone who was a total stranger took everything from me. I mean, if you saw me in England, I was this confident 25-year-old living her life, highly educated, own apartment, figuring out what steps I wanted forward. And I had a plan. You know, you have a plan. In your 20s, you always have a plan, right? And then, yes, the plan playing out, and then some random stranger creates such heaviness in your life, took all that. And the thing is, you think that it take away your dreams, right? You think that. But for me, the dreams were just things. What it took from me was my sense of my own um, safety of who I was. Because I didn't feel as though I can trust myself anymore. And that I think took away that I couldn't trust myself, me not being able to trust myself meant for me that I didn't feel worthy of certain things. I didn't feel confident to be in certain spaces. And to be really honest, I hid behind a lot of things. I wear glasses now, like these spectacles, lovely big ones, because of a scar on my face that you and I both know I've shown you, and you're like, there is no scar.
Yeah.
But it took away from me a perception of what I knew before. So one person can do that to you, take away everything. And it was my sense of safety.
What's the biggest lesson you think you walked away from this, horrible experience with?
That if we change our narrative of how we look at those things. So you spoke about resilience, and resilience takes time. But it's important when you do recognize that you have become resilient, that you look back at the experience and not look at it with the same lens. Right. So now, if anybody, when I talk about it, there's not that emotional response that I used to have of anger and fear and all those things. I almost think about like it has happened to me. There's no turning back. There's nothing that would have changed in any circumstances because I have the rational, logical thinking method. But in some ways, it has shifted who I am to be this person that I really like being right now. Like I love the person that I've become. The decisions that I've made in the last 2 years have been life-changing for me. I met you, you know, I've met some amazing people, and it would not have been pivoted if I did not have that experience. Yes, I wish I didn't have it, but I've learned so much, and I learned to change my narrative of myself from that. I don't know if that made any sense to you there.
Actually, it does, and that's an integral part of the resilient journey for anyone, changing the narrative of what happened, changing the narrative of how you see yourself, because you, as I just said earlier, when we face setbacks, are bouncing forward into the person we are to become and are becoming. A tremendous journey, Gayatree, from trauma to triumph. So many men, women, and children, around the world have had these horrific experiences. And luckily for us, unfortunately, you went through this, but luckily you have grown out of it and can now share your experiences and the lessons and bring some value and some hope to others who have done that. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thank you, Devon, for giving me this opportunity to actually share it and feel safe in sharing it. You know, it's very important that and I'm saying this to a wider audience, when you choose to share experiences like this, it's always important to find safe spaces to do that. And for me, Devon, I mean, we've built a friendship that allows me this, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you for taking the time. Hey, if you enjoyed this, if you found it valuable, then drop us a like. But just as importantly, make sure you share it with someone else, because I think they could also benefit from such an inspiring story of triumph over trauma and tragedy. Feel free to join us for the next episode of Keep on Pushing Stories. Until then, you know what to do. Keep on pushing.